So by participating in the support group calls, you are acknowledging you understand there are no mental health providers or attorneys on this call, and that nothing said here is any way to be interpreted as mental health counseling or legal advice. We're so honored to have Linda presenting to our group today. And Linda is available now. Last I spoke with her that she's now doing therapy for targeted parents. So for those of you that are in her state, which is New York, feel free to reach out, and if you want to see somebody who's extremely knowledgeable to get you your own personal help, she's now offering that service as well. So, and we are so honored to have Linda, and she's offered us a bonus for you, and she has sent me a PowerPoint from Dr. Stephen Miller, the late Dr. Stephen Miller, who was just an amazing resource to this community. And I know Linda did a lot of work with him. I got to know him really well, and he mentored me a lot as well. It's such a loss to have lost him in this community. Linda has some of his work, so she did send me over a PowerPoint, and she sent me her PowerPoint. So tomorrow, I will be sending everyone who's on this call, I will be sending you a copy of her PowerPoint as well as Dr. Miller's PowerPoint. All right, so you can have it for your own resource. And maybe you can share it with your attorneys, your mental health providers, and educate your community as well. So with that, let me introduce Linda. So Linda is internationally recognized as a parental alienation specialist. With more than 50 years of professional experience as a family therapist, Linda has helped and protected thousands of children. Linda was personally trained by child psychologist Salvador Minuchin, the pre-eminent founder of the family therapy movement. Linda's treatment approach supports and encourages cooperation and respect with a focus on a child's best interest. Linda recognizes that parents, not therapists, are the experts on their own children, and she therefore serves as a catalyst to parents in the healing process. Linda began her professional career as a caseworker in New York's foster care system in 1970, where she remained for 24 years, helping over 3,000 children. Over the past 3 decades, Linda has focused on helping conflicted parents settle their custody and parental disputes in therapy instead of in court. Linda has testified in more than 500 adversarial custody cases and is highly regarded as an accomplished expert witness and author. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda, the floor is yours.
I want to thank Cindy for inviting me to give this presentation. It's really an honor. Cindy works so hard in working for all alienated parents and children, and so I'm very happy to be here. Reunification therapy is too life-altering for children to risk rolling the dice on getting a therapist. All therapists are not created equal. In this presentation, this is what I hope you will get out of it. What to look for in an effective reunification therapist, why traditional reunification therapies are of little of any benefit in treating severe alienation, mistakes made by traditional reunification therapists that are contraindicated for severe alienation, as Steve taught me. Contraindicated means forbidden, as in life-threatening. Effective interventions of the highly customized, successful reunification therapies, such as Turning Points for Families. Implementing effective therapy in the face of Caden's Law, which is passed in some states, but we recently got it rejected in Washington state, where I did present a comment with children who have aged out of court jurisdiction. Okay, so family therapy is a specialty discipline within the field of mental health. It is, and we're all familiar with this in medical care. You have your primary care physician, then you have your specialists like cardiologists, radiologists, neurologists, orthopedics, and so on. And then within those fields, you have your subspecialists. Like when I just had hip surgery, he wouldn't do knee surgery. He wouldn't do hand surgery. So alienation is a subspecialty within the specialized discipline of family therapy. And so what do you really need to look for in a therapist? First of all, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which has largely been placed now by the ICD, International Classification of All Disorders. The DSM is 1,050 pages long. It is absurd to think that one therapist can specialize in all of it. Now, that's the problem with the courts, because the courts don't realize that. And family therapists have been terrible in putting themselves out there as the one specialty that makes the family the focus of its degree training. That doesn't mean that psychologists, who I know many qualified concerned psychologists who know alienation, but they will be the first to admit that they did not learn family therapy or alienation in their degree training to become a psychologist. They taught themselves afterwards. They came to presentations like this. They came to the Minuchin Center for the Family, where after I trained there, I was on the faculty and trained psychiatrists and psychologists. So you have to ask, so what do you need to look for? And your lawyer should be able to make this case to the courts, because the worst thing you want to do is give a therapy that's contraindicated, because that's like giving penicillin to somebody who's allergic to penicillin. That's how bad it is if you don't have a specialist. So you need a basic foundation of family therapy. You need to know child development. Most mental health disciplines do know that. You do need to have extensive pattern recognition for alienation. Pattern recognition means a lot of cases. When some people get up there and say, oh, alienation is rare, well, they're not a specialist, because then they don't have a lot of cases of alienation. They don't know what they're doing. They can't recognize it. And they have to understand the counterintuitive issues arising in alienation. Now, on my website, lindagottlieb.com, under resources, as well as under parental alienation, I have an article there about all the counterintuitive issues. Everything on my website can be downloaded. You should take advantage of it. But I can't go through all these counterintuitive issues now. I don't have 6 years, and neither do you. You obviously need to know Gardner's 8 manifestations of an alienated child. They are classic. And also, what I will send Cindy, I don't think I sent it, but I will. Cindy, remind me if I forget. Steve Miller did a research study with Bill Burnett and Amy Baker. The population was 17,500 moderately to severely physically abused children. They not only found that abused children don't reject a parent, surprise, surprise, but the 8 manifestations were woven into that research study. Steve did a PowerPoint presentation, I think it was at a PASG annual meeting, and he determined that the manifestations have a known error rate of less than 1%. You can't get closer than a biopsy to that. My mammogram has an error rate of 10%, but when it came back negative for breast cancer, I was confident I didn't have it. So less than 1% is gold. And if somebody knows how to use the manifestations and make the case of this error rate, it is wonderful research for your case. You also need a knowledge of the additional manifestations, the pathological enmeshment, the amnesia about a prior positive relationship, and almost the sudden rejection overnight. And then, of course, Baker and Fine's, Amy Baker's 17 alienating behaviors. And you really need to know the how to apply the scientific method to the evidence in a case. I mean, the manifestations and the alienating behaviors are great, but if you don't know how to use them to rule alienation in or out, they're worthless. So you need to understand science. Okay, so you have a court order for traditional reunification therapy. What's the problem there? Well, we know that traditional reunification therapy is worthless in severe cases, and I'll want to go through some of the mistakes they made. This is some of the research that found that. It's in the PowerPoint. It's on my website. I won't go over it here and take time for that. But these are all the people in research, some of it that shows that in severe cases, alienation is traditional therapy is worthless. Okay, so what are some of the common mistakes? Okay, so it's never appropriate for a therapist to dive into treatment without doing a proper assessment for what is going on. If you have a cold, if you have symptoms of runny nose, it can be symptoms of a cold, the flu, COVID, all sorts of things. Well, the same in mental health. So you have to generate, the therapist needs to generate all competing hypotheses to explain why a child has rejected a parent, and then look for the evidence in the case to rule it in or rule it out. So the three hypotheses are alienation, when the child is rejected by at the behest of the alienating parent, absent a bona fide protective reason. The second is estrangement, when there is clinical significance for abuse and neglect by the rejected parent, but also in the absence of an alienating influence. Children are very forgiving, and a truly abused child will accept a parent's apology before they even get the sentence out. All of you know that an alienated child never accepts apologies. It's too little, too late, all of the above. The problem with not developing a differential diagnosis is that the treatment for all these three different clinical conditions is diametrically opposed from each other. So it's actually malpractice to do treatment in the absence of making an assessment for why the child is rejecting a parent. Traditional therapists just focus on the damaged relationship between the rejected parent and child. In actuality, the more severely damaged relationship is between the child and the alienating parent, because that's one of pathological enmeshment. It's a severe boundary violation of the child by the alienating parent, where the alienating parent really is robbing the child of their own feelings, love, and opinions for the alienated parent and substituting their own. And the other problem with not making this differential diagnosis is that when you focus on the disrupted parent-child relationship, the alienating parent is scot-free. When was the last time a traditional therapist held the alienator responsible for their behavior? It's generally not done. The other thing is that the research shows that severe alienators likely suffer one or more personality disorders. Usually it's a combination: borderline, narcissistic, sociopathic, or antisocial. That's also on my website in the articles. and the damage they do to children. All right, the next mistake that traditional therapists makes is they're not treating the underlying condition, which is the child abuse. The highest priority of a therapist is to protect children. Well, the alienating parent is abusing the child. When they go home to the alienator after traditional outpatient therapy, they're going to relapse. Just like if you give antibiotics to a person with an infection, then you return them to the germ-infested environment that had caused the infection, what's going to happen? That's going to happen here as well. So the proper priority for alienation is to treat the underlying child abuse. And this is reportable. Here is some of the research. It's on my website. I won't go into it here, that classifies alienation as child psychological abuse. Here is the research on the harm to children from this. It's an adverse childhood experience several times over. This is on my website. These are some of the research studies that are important to document a case. The Spinazzola study, Unseen Wounds, is particularly important. A lot of courts believe, and therapists, that psychological abuse is, well, you can't determine it. You don't see wounds, you don't see scars, you don't see cigarette burns, and it doesn't get the attention it should get. In this article, they did the research to find that psychological abuse is at least as damaging as physical abuse, sexual abuse, or the combination. So you need to know this when people minimize the psychological abuse that the alienating parent is committing. And this is just a definition of what psychological abuse is. This is some more of the research about that. I love this diagram. It compares what goes on in parental alienation to child grooming, and really there is no difference. In fact, the alienating behaviors is really a form of coercive control. It meets the standard definition of domestic violence of the child. And the Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo organization has actually created an alienating power wheel that mimics the Duluth domestic violence power wheel. And the behaviors are the same. The only difference is the perpetrator. The next mistake, how often did you hear that they're going to take the child's word for what they say and believe the child? It is so ridiculous. We know that self-reporting is unreliable to begin with. Why do we think a child is going to be a more likely accurate reporter than an adult? It's absurd, and yet so many therapists take the word of the child as if it's truth. Giving voice to an alienated child is they're only going to mimic the words of the alienating parent. And there's research about that. We equate the programming in alienation to the programming in a cult. It really is a brainwashing, and here is some of the research on that. Alienated children are not free agents. They are dependent on their alienating parent, who probably by this time has eliminated all contact with the alienated parent. So the child is virtually 100% responsible, dependent on that parent for survival. This is an article written by a lawyer, published in Family Court Review. How many times have you had the lawyer for the child who represents the child's wishes override the best interest of the child? Even GALs, now they're supposed to represent the best interest of the child. More likely than not, they still represent the child's wishes. And this article by a lawyer points out that an alienated child has diminished capacity, and it is grounds for the lawyer to substitute for the child's wishes by the child's best interests.
Mm.
We know that children are easily suggestible. Those therapists who do traditional therapy, they rarely, if ever, rule out for suggestibility by the alienating parent. If you ask them if they've done that, number one, they don't even know how to do it. And number two, they get insulted. How dare you tell them to do their job? But we have research that shows if you tell a lie as little as 3 times, you believe it. I honestly believe an alienated child could pass a lie detector test. This is why it's so abusive when alienators program the child to believe a false allegation of child abuse or child sex abuse, because the child is then going to believe it as if it happened, and they're going to have the same psychiatric disturbances, PTSD, suicidal ideation, as if the abuse had actually occurred. This is just some of the research on the suggestibility of children. Lying is a natural instinct. What parent has not had to teach their children not to lie? It is a holdover from cave person days. Survival was dependent upon deception and lying. And we still know it's true. Children are storytellers. And yet, traditional reunifications take their word prima facie as if they're saying the truth. There is no support for that scientifically, and it is a big, big error. This is some of the research about that. I've written an amicus brief about this. That's not on my website, but if anybody needs it, I'll be happy to send it to you. What's complicating the fact, on the one hand, children lie frequently. They're easily suggestible. Alienating parents program them in a cult. That's on the one side. Okay, well, how good are therapists at distinguishing a lie from the truth? 54% of the time. You might as well flip a coin. And traditional therapists take the word of the child based upon their assessment 54% of the time that the child is telling the truth. Alienated parents have been charged with sex abuse based on the mere reporting of the child that the parent had sexually abused them. It is a great travesty of justice. It is criminal. We also know that cognitive functioning doesn't mature until the mid-20s. Children are terrible at knowing their own best interests. Even a child who isn't alienated, if they're asked which parent they want to live with, they're going to pick the more passive parent. Adolescent girls picking the parent that lets them smoke pot and have their boyfriends over. So this is another terrible reason to listen to the voice of a child. This is called intuitive reasoning. I won't get into many details. It is highly fallible, and it needs to be backed up with analytical reasoning. Allegations of sex abuse need to be verified with the child's pediatric records. I can't tell you how many therapists said, it doesn't matter what the pediatrician says. If the child said it, it happened. So it's completely irrational. this is just what I'm talking about, intuitive reasoning, and the fact that these children can pass a lie detector test. This is also very important if you are falsely accused. Research shows that the rate of actual incidents of sex abuse occurring in conflicted custody cases is less than 2%. Less than 2%. And yet, the research also found that false allegations can be as high as 35%. I actually think it's closer to 80%. That's been in my practice. In the 800 cases I have reviewed, there are at least one false allegation of physical abuse in 90% of the cases, and sex abuse in about 80% of the cases. It's really awful. If you have, according to Steve, the scientific method, the less than 2% is considered the prior probability, which is the first step in the scientific method to assess whether something occurred, to make a clinical finding. Less than 2% is an extremely low rate. When you have such a low prior, you need massive, overwhelming evidence in the opposite direction to overcome that prior. And the only thing I can think of to overcome a prior of 2% for actual sex abuse occurring in these cases is a video, someone who had direct observation of the incident. Yet so many of these cases, the alienated parent is found guilty by CPS just on the word of a child without ruling out for programming and suggestibility. And these were the grounds that this research was done by George Davis, a child psychiatrist at the Children's Law Institute. And he found that the circumstances for these false allegations of at least 35%, conflicted caretakers, adversarial leading legal proceeding, positive, negative consequences, coaching. Can you think of anything closer to alienation than that? Another mistake that alienating parents, that the traditional therapists make, is that they want to empathize with the child's false allegations of reporting against the alienated parent, validating their feelings and mirroring them back to them instead of challenging them and confronting them. This is another big mistake. Many, if they've been programmed to believe negativity about the alienated parent, that's delusional thinking. How is it therapeutic to validate delusional thinking? It just promotes the alienation narrative, which is a way of promoting and perpetrating the child abuse. It asserts that alleged grievances have a basis in reality, which they don't. It allows the continuation for disrespecting or denigrating the alienated parent. Imagine if you are being accused of something you haven't done, and the therapist says, well, you need to apologize, Mr. or Ms. Alienated Parent, and if you don't apologize, I'm going to tell the court you're not cooperating with the therapy. I mean, it's really absurd. It empowers the child. It gives them credibility. So, it's like a scale. If you over-empower the child, you're disempowering the alienated parent. It's the exact opposite of what you should be doing. This is profoundly harmful to the child to validate their feelings. So I can't tell you how many therapists who are validating a false allegation of sex abuse, and they've said, well, it's a child's reality, but but it's a delusional reality, and they keep validating it. So I said, okay, well, tell me something. If your child comes into your office on the 10th floor and they say to you, I'm Superman or Superwoman, and you see your placate over there, I'm going to put that placate on and I'm going to jump out your window and prove to you that I'm Superman or Superwoman. Would you let them do it, Madam or Mr. Therapist? And they sit there with the humada or Jackie Gleason reaction. Because if they say to me they wouldn't, then why would they validate a false allegation of child abuse without even verifying it? They don't verify it. They don't care about seeing if the pediatrician validated it. If a child's been sexually abused, they're going to act out in school. How come they have these perfect behavioral records in school, these children that were allegedly sexually abused by a parent? And this is criminal to do that. So now you're asked to apologize to the child for something you didn't do, right? Well, again, an apology further disempowers the alienated parent. It elevates the child. It reinforces that, oh, maybe the abuse actually happened. It's humiliating. It reinforces the alienation dynamics. Apologies are never accepted. You know, they're too little, they're too late, they're a combination of both. And then the alienator uses the apologies in court to say he really did it after all. Now, what if the allegation is you sexually abused your child? Well, now you're apologizing, acknowledging you did something in front of a mandated reporter. So now the mandated reporter your own therapist now has to report you to CPS because you said you abused your child. I mean, it's a no-win double bind situation for the alienated parent. It's wrong. It's not healthy. So, okay. So this again further overempowers the alienated child. It is a reversal of family hierarchy. The children are more powerful than you are. Salvador Minuchin, actually, just to give you a little bit of history, alienation didn't just arise because child psychiatrist Richard Gardner documented the manifestations in 1985. This dynamic actually formed the birth of the family therapy movement in the 1950s. It was called triangulation. And so nobody should be able to say alienation is junk science. The label has changed. Notice they only attack the label. They never describe what's going on because everybody knows that in some cases, in divorce or separation, one parent has turned the child against the other parent, absent a bona fide protective reason. Nobody can dispute that. Notice that the critics never define what alienation is. They just say it's junk science and they move on. So Dr. Minuchin said that the triangulated child, which is really the alienated child, is standing on the shoulders of the triangulating parent. So that child is more powerful than both parents. Well, that's where he said it here. Traditional therapists fail to recognize that the alienated child is already overempowered, and they view the child as being having no control. Well, they don't have control over what happened between the parents, that's true, but you can't transfer that to the relationship between the child and each parent. It is a mislabel to say that the child, an alienated child, is powerless. Unfortunately, traditional reunification therapists make empowering the child a primary intervention of their therapy, and everything stems from there. It is the exact opposite of what they should be doing. Of course, this further disempowers the alienated parent because, again, the more you raise the child, the lower the alienated parent is. Sometimes you'll get a therapist who thinks they can reason with a child out of their beliefs. Well, you try reasoning these children who are victims of a cult out of their beliefs. It doesn't work, and we'll get to what does work and what I do. Attempting to reason with a child who's alienated is a simplistic intervention. Traditional therapists allow the child to orchestrate the therapy. The child is permitted to show up or not show up, get out of the alienating parent's car or not get out. Some therapists go out there and try to talk the child into their office. That's not their job. You know whose job it is to talk the children into coming into the therapist's office? The alienating parent. They have the power. They have the control. They should be bringing the child to your office. The child is allowed to dictate what to talk about in the therapy. I want that apology, and I'm not talking about anything else until then. The child is unilaterally allowed to walk out of the therapy session. Oh, it's too much for me. I can't deal with him or her. This further overempowers the child and disempowers the alienated parent. The child is permitted to maltreat and disrespect both the therapist and the alienated parent. They're allowed to talk in the most uncivil, disrespectful manner. They're allowed to curse, and the therapist does nothing about it. The primary responsibility of any therapist when you're dealing with children is to make sure they become socially appropriate citizens. No child treated by a traditional therapist is being taught that. They are allowed to do whatever they want and say whatever they want. They have even physically assaulted their parent, and the therapist has not stopped them. When the therapist permits children to treat a parent like this, it's not therapy, it's therapist-assisted elder abuse. Finally, the therapy fails because it's the wrong therapy. And guess who's blamed? Therapist doesn't take responsibility. It's not my fault. It's not the therapy I was practicing. Of course, it's the alienated parent. You didn't apologize. You didn't validate. You weren't obsequious. You didn't kowtow to your child. Blaming the alienated parent for the inevitable failure of an ineffective therapy results in, you refer to anger management therapy. You need parent education. Maybe you should step back and let your child come to you. Spontaneous reunifications are rare. If you back out because you want to keep the peace for yourself as well as the child, and if you feel you have to take a break because you need to be grounded for yourself, that's okay. Nobody walks in your shoes. But when a therapist tells you to do it and you're really not ready to do it, and that's not what you want to do, guess what? If you do it, because the therapist told you to, you're now considered abandoning your child. You haven't shown interest in your child, and you'll be called by the judge. Why did you not pursue the therapy? And it'll be the judge down the road, because the judge changes. So try to explain to a new judge what happened in therapy 2 years ago, when the judge has now 30,000 cases before he got to yours again. So it's time to turn the page. What should a therapist do? A successful reunification therapist takes charge of the therapy. They must restore the alienated parent's status in the family and authority over the child. They anoint the alienated parent with a co-therapist role. I will get to that in a minute. You are an expert on your own child. I have no way of knowing your child better than you. And quite frankly, I'm not interested in doing that. It's not my job. Only if Sal Minuchin would say, only if you plan to adopt the child should you be assuming that parental role. I am a catalyst to the alienated parent to heal the child. I'm going to establish healthy family hierarchy. The alienated parent is in charge. And I am requiring civil and respectful dialogues and behaviors. Behaviors come first. You need to have socially appropriate behaviors. Feelings come later. It's called the process must be working well before you get to the content. And if your therapist doesn't know that, you should say that. Wait a second, the process stinks. I'm being abused. You're being abused. How can we listen to anybody if we're being abused? You need to establish respect and dialogue, respectful and civil dialogue. So a successful reunification therapist develops a treatment contract with you, the alienated parent. I can't imagine the last time I heard a traditional reunification therapist sitting down with the alienated parent and saying, let's go over the goals you want for this therapy. No, most of them say, I know what's best for your child. I'm going to tell you what the goals are. Just like in medicine, no physician would say to a patient, you need this operation. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm not going to tell you the risks. I'm not going to tell you the cost. You're just going to do it because I said so. That's absurd. The same thing, the same standards apply to mental health treatment. You are entitled to know what the therapist has in mind for the therapy and develop mutually responsible goals. And it should be a written contract so it's clear. The next thing the therapist should be doing is holding the alienating parent accountable. They must relinquish their alienating behaviors, and they must require the child to treat everyone with respect. They have the primary responsibility. In most of these cases, the alienated parent has had virtually all their time rescinded. Even if they have a little time here and there, you have no authority. Parents are responsible for how children behave. That is not the therapist's job. If a child disrespected a teacher, no parent would say it's a teacher's responsibility to get my child's behavior under control. I throw my hands up. It's not my responsibility. That is absurd. Let's see how long that child remains in that school if that's the parent's attitude. Therapy, reunification therapy, requires behavioral change. It's not this amorphous discussion of feelings. Oh my goodness, feelings. How do you define feelings anyway? Progress in therapy. This is a behavioral therapy. You should have a behavioral contract. It should start out with everyone treating each other respectfully and civilly. A reunification therapist who knows what they're doing will hold the alienating parent accountable with the caveat: if you don't send your child into the therapy with a positive attitude and with respect, I am going to notify the court that you're sabotaging the therapy. Getting the child to your office, the therapist's office, should not be an ordeal. Behavioral changes. That's what you want to see leading up to your parenting time reinstated. Let's talk about that for a minute. It's not alienation if the alienated parent has been abusive or neglectful. That's the definition. By definition, it can't be alienation. Well, then why shouldn't you have contact with your child? If you're a loving parent, why aren't you having contact? Why is anybody allowing your parenting time to be taken away? This is not just for your benefit, it's for the child's benefit. Children do better when they have two parents. This is time a child can never get back. They are being deprived of one of only two people in the entire world who will love them unconditionally. This is the time that children benefit from input, from morals, from expectations from two parents who love them unconditionally. This is about depriving the child, and that's the point your lawyers should be making to the court. And get the research that's on my website about how children are harmed when they miss out on formative years from both parents. And let's talk about that. The first 5 years of life is where 80% of the human brain develops. 80% of their personality will develop. It is absurd to say those are not important years if you're missing out. Oh, they're only a child, an infant. They're taking everything in. They're reading emotions better than they're reading words. And the formative years are just as important as adolescent years as well. Vague and subjective opinions about making progress. How many times? Oh, we're getting better. Oh, yeah. So the child only said, I hate you one time instead of three times in a 45-minute session. That is not progress. Progress should be defined by behavior, such as this: a kiss and then a hug. What alienated parents haven't had in years, in all probability. That's the change you should be expecting your therapist to make. That should be part of your treatment contract. Nobody can define feeling better. This is another thing that is not based in science. You need to take baby steps. The child will be traumatized if they're introduced to the parent too quickly. That there's no science for that. That's a faulty assumption. The child does not need time to adjust to a parent. And it sends the message to the child that you are too dangerous or unpredictable, and you can only be tolerated in small doses. That's absurd. Contact. Contact is the greatest antidote to the alienation. Contact, contact, contact. The more, the merrier. And in fact, I am arguing that contact should be at least as often and at least as intense as the amount of time you were denied that contact unlawfully. In fact, some states like Texas have passed laws now that says time lost, time taken back. And my colleague Loretta Mason, her website is equally well put together for all of you. You should use it. And I forget the name of the alienated parent in Texas who got that law passed in Texas, and he's going around to all the states now. Time lost, time denied, time taken back. Alienated children will enthusiastically welcome their alienated parent back in their lives and behave lovingly if the alienating parent gives permission. I've seen these kids flip like a light switch because their true love and need for the alienated parent is not extinguished, it's only repressed. And if they are being freed by the alienating parent from that loyalty conflict, that if they're going to lose their love and approval of the alienating parent, if they accept the alienated parent back in their life, once that's removed from them, the loyalty conflict, they will flip like a light switch. That's how quickly. And that's their real feelings. It's a misnomer to say that when there is no contact, if the judge takes away contact because you've made your case that it's child abuse, the loss of contact from the restricted contact from the alienating parent, it removes an albatross away from the child's neck. They're not happy about this. They don't want to reject you. They say they hate you, but they don't mean it. So when you can convince the therapist and the court to hold the alienating parent accountable, this will change. It has to have the right circumstances. Severe alienators don't do it just because a therapist asks them to do it. They have to understand you are going to make this, the therapist is going to make this case to the judge who will take away contact. There have to be consequences. Reunification therapy requires contact. It is not dependent on time. It is protracted time. It is dependent on the alienating parent's genuine cooperation and support. They must be held accountable. In case I haven't made myself clear, the intervention is contact. And more contact. Alienating parents must be judged by their behavior, not by their toothless words. How many times they say, "Oh, I encourage my child to keep the other parent's parenting time, but they have minds of their own." That's bull. They don't mean it. Alienated children are not free agents. Imagine telling CPS arriving at the door, "Why hasn't your child been in school for 3 weeks?" "Well, I told them to go, but they have a mind of their own." There are certain things that are so important. The word is wrong that the alienating parent encourages the child. No, they must require the child to keep the alienated parent's parenting time, just like they require their child to go to school, keep medical appointments, wear a seatbelt in the car. They know how to use their parental authority to get their child to cooperate. And they can't claim both. I'm a competent parent, but the child has a mind of their own. I can't get them to go. Impossible. You can't do both simultaneously. Teaching children how to behave begins at home. Parents must teach their children to behave in a socially appropriate manner, and if they aren't doing it, it's child abuse. So, when alienating parents claim that they leave it up to the child, it's really not them that's doing it. This is a ruse. It's a merely plausible deniability. I really do my job. It's really not up to me. When alienating parents coercively, cruelly, cowardly blame the alienation on their children, this is no better than visiting the sins of the parent upon the child. It is cruel. It is criminal behavior. Alienated children will carry for the rest of their lives the unbearable guilt of having rejected a parent unless they are absolved, unless they learn that they were only going along with their alienating parent to get along. They had no choice. That is the job of a therapist. Therapists must hold the alienating parent accountable to take meaningful corrective action. They can't blame the alienated parent and saying you're supposed to control your child when they're with you. Alienated parents have no power. And what happens if they do try to set limits? It's always distorted. It's emotional abuse. It might be physical abuse. Suppose you have to restrain your child from physically assaulting you, breaking your property. That's what they do now. That gets turned into you committing physical abuse or sexual abuse. If you set limits, how dare you deny them the cell phone that their alienated parent gave them so the alienating parent can call them during your entire visit and excite them and say, don't you dare get along with your other parent. That is undermining your relationship. It's undermining your contact. Alienating parents must present a united front with you, with the alienated parent. That's how it works. So the child can't play one off against the other. The child is really a victim here. We shouldn't forget that. Alienating parents are basically gaslighting the child. When they corrupted their mind and turned them against you, they have the leverage to rescind the alienation narrative, and they will only do it if proper consequences are imposed. The therapist should be notifying the court. The court is really the only one that has the authority to get a severely alienating parent under control. And again, the parent can't claim simultaneously to be genuine in their support of the alienated parent's relationship with the child, but also say, I'm a competent parent, because they're not getting the child to do what they say they want them to do, which is to keep their parenting time. When they violate your parenting time, they're also teaching the child antisocial behaviors. The court should be thinking about that. True, genuine reunification therapists will challenge the pathological enmeshment between the child and the alienating parent. Pathological enmeshment was actually a term coined by Salvador Minuchin, my mentor, which was a boundary violation, except that he didn't precede the word enmeshment with pathological because he felt all enmeshment is pathological. And what happens here in alienation is that the child doesn't know what boundary violations are. The child doesn't realize that when you show up at your child's game and the alienating parent pulls them off the field and embarrasses them in front of everyone because you had the nerve, the chutzpah, to show an interest in your child, to care about them and show up at your game, that is a boundary violation, a severe boundary violation. And it's cruel. The therapist has to establish healthy boundaries and family hierarchy. They must do this by correcting the revisionist family history about you. You have every right to correct the misinformation about you. We don't pathologize or criticize or use ad hominem attacks on the alienating parent. That's very important. You don't call them names. You don't say they're cruel. You don't say they're mean. You don't say they're committing child abuse. But you have every right to say, I love you too much. I did not sexually abuse you. I did not do this to you. It's important to do that for the child because, again, if they believe falsely that a parent had maltreated them, doesn't care about them, aside from the psychiatric symptoms, they're going to seek love in all the wrong places. And we have research from child psychiatrist Kyle, what's his name? I'll remember it in a minute, at Yale, who wrote a book, Father Need, in which he found the statistics about when a father is driven from a child's life. And I'm sure if we had it about mothers, there'd be comparable statistics. But children who have a father missing from their life have a 75% higher likelihood of having a teen pregnancy than the general population. And that also applies to the boys. Kyle Pruitt is his name. I knew it would come back to me. So, again, falsehoods repeated over and over again become the child's reality. They need to be disabused of the false narratives that are being perpetuated. You don't care about the child, you don't love them, you've abandoned them, and you've abused them. But it's important that a therapist deal with the child's revisionist history to correct it. So what do we do at Turning Points and other 4-day programs that have been peer-reviewed that are like that? First of all, the child requires a protective separation from the alienating parent. Now, the Cadence law that was passed in California and similar laws in other states they were passed with the support of alienating parents, by the way, not many professionals. And that's one thing that everybody should be doing now, lobbying the legislatures. There are programs, there are organizations out there like National Parents' Rights, keep track of all the state legislations that are revising their child custody laws. And I've been testifying at them or submitting comments if they don't get to me, because some of the last one I went to in Washington State last week, they had 2,000 people who wanted to present, and they didn't get to all of us. They didn't get to the people online. They just listened to the ones that appeared in person. But it worked because they did not include, as some of the alienating parents wanted, that alienation should be considered junk science. So one of the misnomers about Turning Points and other 4-day by the way, we're not reunification camps. When I think of a camp anyway, I think of summer camp. So I don't know where this name came from. Turning Points is a therapeutic vacation. We only work with one family at a time. And yes, we do have activities. That's half the program, but we're not a camp. But one of the misnomers that they are saying is that we support removal of a child from a fit parent to reconnect them to the rejected parent. We never supported taking a child from a fit parent. The fact is that alienating parents are committing child abuse. So it's a removal, a protective removal from an alienating parent who is psychologically abusing the child. And by the way, somewhere in here, at least on my website, they're also engaging in domestic violence. The coercion that's involved in getting a child to override their instinct for a parent is a form of domestic violence. And when they allow, permit, and model for the child to physically abuse and maltreat the alienated parent, that's domestic violence by proxy. And it's another form of abusing the child. So we need to recognize, number one, that the separation is first and foremost a protective separation. We are treating the underlying condition before we're treating the dysfunctional relationships, which is also the pathological enmeshment with the alienating parent. So again here, I just told you this. The alienating parent is committing domestic violence. It is anti-instinctual to reject a parent. Because of our long dependency on our parents, it's part of the instinct for survival, just like food and water and oxygen. So to overcome that need for a parent, the coercive control meets the definition of domestic violence. And when the alienating parent is allowing and permitting the child to abuse the alienated parent, they are doing by proxy what they wanted to do and in fact had been doing. I have been finding, and my colleagues have been finding, that when the alienating parent, if it's the mother, and she's making allegations of domestic violence, she has actually been the domestic violence perpetrator, and she's projecting those behaviors onto the father. And I honestly believe that fathers who are victims of domestic violence is underreported. It's not cool to come forward and say I was abused by my wife. So I think it's underreported, but this is working both ways. And it's very sad that the domestic violence groups have really turned their back on alienated mothers. The reason they do it is they're the other group aside from alienating parents. I call them the alienating parents industry because being online now, they're all working together and all have gotten together. So I call them the alienating parents industry. There are a few professionals who work in domestic violence who are claiming that alienation is junk science because they're saying that there are some perpetrators of domestic violence who are playing the alienation card. And as a way of exonerating themselves, I'm not guilty of domestic violence. She's the alienator. And this is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's called a logical fallacy, appeal to the consequent. I don't like the outcome of how this opinion, if I accept this opinion that alienation exists, I don't like the possible outcome that some perpetrators of domestic violence will play the alienation card. Well, we have the science to rule domestic violence in, just like we have the science to rule alienation in. We should be relying on science. If medicine followed that rule, that they didn't like some of the unintended consequences of a treatment, well then, chemotherapy would be outlawed, because the consequence is hair loss and nausea. And that's absurd. So anyway, that's my pet peeve with the domestic violence industry. What's happening is half my caseload now are alienated mothers. And the domestic violence people have turned their backs on alienated mothers. And they are being physically assaulted by their sons, also by their daughters. And it's brutal. I've had alienated mothers who needed medical treatment. They had to have hands x-rayed for possible fractures and so on. And so the DV groups are, when they could be intervening now to help these adolescent boys, preventing them from becoming adult perpetrators of domestic violence, why aren't they doing it? What do they think is going to happen to these boys, these alienated boys who are physically assaulting their mothers? Well, how are they going to wind up treating their partners when they grow up? That is a real shame that this is not being, it's not a choice between protecting children and protecting mothers or, women. It's not either or. We have the science and we can do both. The protective separation required by the effective and safe reunification programs is needed so the child can be freed from the abusive loyalty conflict. They don't have to go home and report to their alienating parent that they either have to lie and say, I had a terrible time over there, or they really have to create a terrible time. So it's one or the other. You can't challenge the pathological enmeshment if the child continues to have this boundary violation connection to their alienating parent. So that's another reason that the effective reunification programs require this protective separation. Again, the child's love and need for their alienated parent is not extinguished, it's only repressed. The protective separation allows the child to shed the false mask of rejection and recover those feelings and truly invest in the alienated parent. The protective separation allows the child to finally think for themselves or begin that process. Because of the pathological enmeshment, they've been robbed of their own feelings and thinking and beliefs. So what we do in these programs is to encourage the child through the Socratic method. We don't lecture them. We ask questions to get the child to think. And the protective separation will allow for that. The protective separation allows the child to appreciate and distinguish love from uncaring. They can distinguish healthy parental affection from abuse. They can distinguish appropriate discipline from emotional abuse. How many times I've heard alienated parents tell me they are afraid to hug their child because they're going to be accused of sexually abusing their child. That is criminal. It's horrible for the child to feel that they cannot hug a parent. What makes Turning Point's 96.4% effective? It was found safe and 96.4% effective by a peer-reviewed study, which is also on my website. So what accounts for that? Two things. We work with memories of the prior positive relationship and the child's powerful instinct for a parent. The co-therapist at Turning Points is the child's instinct for a parent and the alienated parent. The very first intervention that I got, Turning Points always relied on the alienated parent to bring the child to me. And I've had, I think, something like 7 interventions from California where these children got on a plane and they came cooperatively. Now, I'm not going to say they were all happy and gleeful, but they cooperated. 2 teenagers took a car ride from Texas for an extended vacation. 4 teenagers did that from Ohio for an extended vacation with their alienated parent. Of the 186 children who came to Turning Points, 179 traveled under the auspices of their alienated parent. How did that happen? Well, I knew in my instinct, working when I first started, the first intervention I got basically was, I think, in 2015. I knew in my blood, I knew in my instinct that the children would come with their alienated parent. I knew that from the very first intervention I got. I never used a transport team ever. And how did I know it? Because I knew the child's instinct for a parent. At that point, I had already worked with 3,000 abused and neglected foster children, all of whom couldn't wait to go home, couldn't wait for the next visit, hung on their parents during the visit. And I just said to myself, if truly abused children did that, I knew that an alienated child who once had a loving relationship with a protective parent would come. And that's what happened. I think the first 4 interventions came from Florida, and they all got on a plane. Out of the 6 children who came with their alienating parent, 5 came because the alienating parent, they were in driving distance, and the alienating parent insisted on driving them. I don't do that anymore for a number of reasons. They don't leave, they hang around, and they try to have an escape. They developed an escape plan, believe it or not, in violation of the court order. I think only 1 child would have not gotten on the plane from Florida. She was 9 years old, and I don't think she really properly understood what a legal order was. But all but that, these children came without incident. The child's instinct for a parent overcomes the adversities of the alienation narrative as long as they are freed from contact with their alienating parent. Our most basic instinct is not for survival, it's for family. So I'm going to take you through a bit of emotion here, or I'm not going to say very much. I want you to get the feel for the memorabilia intervention. Now, as an alienated parent, you already have these feelings. This is what I do on day one. This is the icebreaker to the alienation. I walk the family down memory lane with pictures and photographs and memorabilia, cards that children made for their parent for Father's Day, Mother's Day, and so on. Just so we don't have to say your parent really loved you. They experience it. And this is a major difference between family therapy and every other treatment modality. We focus on creating positive and corrective experiences. Talking changes nothing. Actions speak louder than words. So I put this together. This is only maybe a third of the PowerPoints I put together about the instinct for a parent and the connection to a parent, just to give you the feeling of day one. I see Cindy smile like she's looking at, I feel like she's looking and smiling at all of this. So none of these were your family, and none of them were mine. And I don't know how a tear doesn't get welled up as you look at this love that children have for parents. And this is what breaks down the alienation narrative in day one. So, okay, I left time here, and I'm not sure if I should address well, let me just say a few things about adult children. It's really very hard when you don't have control in any way over adult. It's hard enough when they're minors and you don't get the cooperation from therapists, courts, and other professionals. At least you had some recourse. So, assuming your child hasn't blocked you, I would definitely maybe once a month say, "Hey, I love you. looking forward to maybe having a dinner. I would keep it only positive. Don't mention the word alienation. Don't mention the other parent. Focus on the present only, or the possibility of going forward. Maybe share some information about, your niece or nephew who got married and had kids, because very often these children don't just reject you, they reject your entire extended family. So I would try to keep that open. If you're blocked, if you can get a message through a third party, I would do that once in a while. It's a very powerless situation, and maybe we could have some general questions from the audience after that. In terms of these laws that are being passed, I actually wrote a couple of articles on my website about that. It's funny, in California, I don't know if most of you are in California or just around the country. California, I think, had the first law passed, Caden's law. And one of the people, an alienating parent, who is out there pushing herself as a protector of children without any degrees and any background, was responsible for passing Caden's law. She actually helped to kidnap several children from their alienated parent in violation of a court order. A couple of cases were mine. I think 3 cases were mine. And one case was Lynn Steinberg's. Another case was my colleague Loretta Mace. Which is very interesting, because there is a brief on my website under laws where this person was specifically called out by the judge in the case. You'll know it maybe as the TikTok case that was streamed on social media forever. That judge literally called this person out by name for intervening, exposing the alienated children, names, addresses, and faces, and left them vulnerable to kidnapping. In fact, some strangers had sent them a message offering to take them and give them shelter, so they didn't have to go to their alienated parent, because the alienating parent had lost custody. So I think you have to know some of who these people are, and I've called them out in a number of articles on my website. There are lots of lies that they say. Again, they never define alienation. They just say it's junk science. Ask them for a definition, and they either don't give the proper definition or distort the definition. There is no way that anyone can claim that in the whole history of jurisprudence, not a single parent attempted or succeeded in turning a child against the other parent absent a bona fide protective reason. So it exists. And in fact, a lot of them will say it does exist. It's rare. Okay, I don't care if it's 1 in a million. If it's your case and you have the evidence, you make the case to the court. This is the evidence for alienation. Doesn't matter that it didn't exist in a million other cases. This is the evidence in my case. And the judge should only be concerned about the one case at bar, that the evidence either rules alienation in or out. And that's the issue. So one of the, a number of the false, it's interesting. This judge in California, in one of the cases, called out this alienating parent who was in the courtroom and for helping to kidnap the kids from the alienated parent. And then said on the record in California, you know, the legislation, Caden's law, did not say alienation doesn't exist. The law only tied my hands about remedy, that I can't send them out of state, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. So I had a couple of California cases where the judge just said, all right, you don't want me to order a special 4-day program? I'm just giving the alienated parent sole legal and physical custody. I've determined it's child abuse. I'm doing a removal. And you, alienated parent, can get any therapy you want. You have full control. And that's been the alternative in a number of states where that has been the approach now. So a couple of the lies that need to be addressed, which was fought in the Washington state legislation and in other states, is that you can't just remove custody from a parent based on an allegation of abuse. That's what some of these laws state. If one parent just alleges abuse by the other parent, we don't need an evidentiary hearing. We just take away the parenting time. That is just unconstitutional. So we've been fighting the laws on that basis. We want to know if it's true child abuse. Absolutely. Child abuse is serious, but it must be determined by a scientific method. And the opposite is true also. These laws need to address what happens what is the detrimental effects to a child if they believe a false allegation of child abuse by a parent. These laws need to address that as well. They also need to address child psychological abuse. These laws don't include that. So all of you should really be lobbying these state legislators in various states, band together to help the next alienated parent from losing their kids. Tell your story to the legislators. Now, I realize I'm often asked that question: how come more alienated parents don't come and tell their story? Well, they want to protect their children. If they tell their story, their children may be exposed. Alienators don't care about exposing their children. That's why they have them testify against their alienated parent, or that's why they have them tattle on their alienated parent in interviews with the judges. Very few alienated parents, you will notice, want to subject their child to tattling on the other parent. They leave that child out of it, even when they feel that child in private with the judge will say something that defends them. So I don't know, maybe we'll just leave it now for questions from the participants.
Okay. Yeah, we have.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Linda. That was an excellent presentation. However, I will say that knowing every parent on here, that you just walked us through our experience. So you validated what we have already undergone. And thank you for coming from a place of knowledge and experience and academia to give us that there's nothing wrong with us. And so I hope everybody recognizes that. The challenge is that there's so much misinformation out there that that's what we're up against. So I just want to comment on a couple of things that you stated with regarding the therapy. So one of the things that we have undergone in coaching our parents is when you enter therapy with any therapist inside of your custody situation, to enter with whoever you're working with as the clinician and asking for a therapeutic plan, which will exactly accomplish what Linda's talking about. What are we going to do? What are our goals and objectives, and what are we working on? And then something else we've had really great success with is to ask for a monthly summary, that they actually write a monthly summary, which you will have to pay for. The aligned parent will not be willing to pay for it. And I suggest to our parents be offer to say, I'll pay for it. And if you get that monthly summary, and there's a few cases we've had this going on with now, and thank goodness we took that approach, and with some of the parents I'm working with, and because we have those monthly summaries, as soon as the aligned parent got frustrated and having to modify their behavior, they fired the therapist against the court order. And now we have the summaries that already stated there was enmeshment, mother doesn't want a relationship with the father, or doesn't want the child to have a relationship with the father. So those are perfect, and we're getting ready to go back into court on that particular case. So ask for the summaries, pay for them yourself if you have to, and get the therapeutic plan before you begin the therapy. And if you can, and you know enough, try to get into your court orders and ask the court for what it is you want them to accomplish in whatever therapy you're trying to go into. Reunification therapy doesn't work. Individual therapy doesn't work. You heard Linda say all of that. It has to be the family therapy or one of these programs if you have a state that will allow these programs. So, so the one question I'm going to have, just based on your presentation, and then I'll go to everyone else's question. So what if the aligned parent refuses to cooperate in therapy?
Well, then hopefully the order for the court, um, if it's really an order for family therapy, that means everyone plays a role. And as long as you have some control over the alienating parent, you can let them know that you consider that they're not cooperating, and you're going to notify the court that they're sabotaging the therapy. That's your chance to build, that's the therapist's chance to build evidence against the alienating parent.
Okay. Yes, and that's how we were able to do that, by requiring the monthly summaries, and could show that how the other parents' behavior was. It wasn't, they weren't modifying their behavior, or they were pushing back on that behavior. Oh, perfect. So, and then my next
And I
question,
just want to explain one other thing. These should be very time limited therapies. You know, behaviors can be changed instantaneously. If a 10-year-old is slapping her 1-month-old sister around, the mother doesn't say, give me a schedule for when you will reduce your attacking your sister. You will say, this has to stop immediately, or else these are your consequences. There will not be another incident. So the behaviors should be immediate. The alienator must say, you are losing your cell phone if the therapist reports back to me that you were abusive or disrespectful. Now, that doesn't mean they have to agree with everything we say. It's not the content that matters, it's the format. They have to be respectful. So you should, if there should be a gradual building up to your parenting time. There should be meetings for dinner outside of the therapy session. Let the therapist go to dinner with you, and let the therapist leave after half an hour or something. If the order should be structured that way, because you are a safe parent. And And the treatment is contact. The more contact, the better. So, you know, I say if there is not significant behavioral changes within a couple of months, you need to go back to court. This needs to be time limited. We don't have forever. Childhood is not forever.
Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to change to another channel. I noticed there's a few questions on this as well. So in the world of false allegations, how much time should a clinician spend on working on changing the false narrative? And what should the targeted parent do to get the clinician to understand that these are false allegations when they don't? And especially in a case where the aligned parent gets to pick the therapist or the court just names somebody and we don't even know what kind of experience they have.
Well, that's the whole point. It being forearmed with knowledge. The point has to be made to the court that the therapist needs to be qualified. They need to have shown, they need to understand family dynamics. They need to understand domestic violence as well as parental alienation. So you need to get the right therapist to sign. Nobody would go to a primary care physician for brain surgery. That's the point that has to be made to the court.
Okay. And then on that note, I want to now take that same conversation on false allegations, and now let's go to adult children. They've aged out, they're all out in their world, and now there's false narratives. So there's been a clinician we've had present, and I'm not going to state her name because we are recording this, who has said that when you're dealing with adult children, we should not go back into modifying and correcting the false narrative, but meet the child where they are and reconnect and create a new relationship. What is your perspective on the false narrative regarding adult children?
Well, you have to make sure that the reconnection is solid first. Like I say, you can't go back until there is a reconnection because you'll get rejected. They don't want to hear it. I would not do this without the help of a therapist too when you want to bring that up. It's too sensitive an issue. And so yeah, and although these situations are very specialized, but you really have to focus on a positive reconnection about what your child is doing and what you're doing, and not bring up the any part of the alienation narrative until the connection is really strong.
Okay. So yeah, and that being said, to our parents, if you want, ISNAF offers programs on that. I'm not a clinician, but perhaps one of the ways you could get that access is by finding one of the experts that you get to choose, you get to vet, who does have PA knowledge to help be your therapist as you work through that situation with an adult child, and they can coach you on a day-to-day basis.
Right. That's a good idea too. There are like my colleague Loretta Mace does a lot of this work, and people can contact her through lorettamace.com, and she will do parent coaching for parents who want to know how to reconnect with adult children. And even if they're minor children now, but they're reconnected, she does a lot of coaching in that area.
Okay.
She'll do that individual work.
Okay. Now you mentioned it as coaching. So because we do have parents from all over the United States. Okay, and we have somebody who's here from internationally as well. Couple of people. So in order to do therapy, they have to be licensed in that state. In order to do coaching,
They
They
don't
don't have to
require.
be licensed.
That's
So
right.
that's my question. So Loretta's doing coaching.
Yes.
Are you doing coaching?
Um, that's not really my bailiwick. I'm a relationship therapist primarily. I work much better with the parent-child relationship. Certainly, if parents have reconnected with an adult child, and if they wanted to come to New York, I would work it out to do intensive several days and work that through with them. Um, so in the meantime, I would use Loretta. And if she lets me know, listen, hey, I'm overwhelmed, I can't take on these cases, take some. Under those circumstances, I would do some coaching.
Okay. All right. And I'm going to reach out. And if maybe you could send Loretta a note that I'm going to reach out and see if she might be willing to present for us this year on
Oh yeah,
exactly that.
absolutely. Yeah, she should
Maybe.
absolutely, because that's what she would present on.
Yeah.
How to
Yeah. So,
parent coaching. So
okay.
yes, absolutely.
All right. So now I'm going to go to our questions, and I know we're hitting our time here, so I'm going to try to get through as many, although many of them were a lot of sentences. So I'm going to cut it down, and I apologize to those of you if I can't read your whole circumstance, but I'm going to get to the question. So, question one here was: is PA a common form of child? Is it the most common form of child abuse in the country, and is it a felony in some states?
Oh, well, that is a legal question. I don't know, but it certainly can be Googled. The internet can be used for that. I know there are a number of states that do say this behavior is criminal, but unfortunately, I don't know anybody who's been prosecuted for that. That's the problem.
Okay. So the next question here, and I'm cutting it down so we can get more questions in. So I apologize, but we just needed a few sentences. So this is a 16-year-old juvenile delinquent. It's a daughter. And this father's been accused of false allegations, restraining order. So how does the therapist treat such a severe lie when the father is totally innocent?
Well, again, she probably is not in therapy with a therapist who knows how to deal with this. She's probably in therapy um, since she was coached to make a false allegation. The alienating parent probably has her in with one of these therapists that accept, based on no evidence, yes, I was sexually abused, and they're validating that abuse, and it's a real issue because unfortunately, I really do believe these kids get to the point where they actually believe that they were falsely sexually abused by a parent, and the harm to that is as bad as if they actually had been sexually abused.
Is this parent who I know has a minor child? And what do you suggest for someone who doesn't want to go into the legal system? What other answers do you have? And I believe this parent has a 16-year-old child.
What do you mean doesn't want to go through the legal system? In other words,
Well, I happen to know this particular parent is an attorney themselves and understands that at the late stage of their child being 16, almost 17, it's would escalate things further. So what can this parent do? And this parent has been able to reconnect with their child. Is there
ah,
is there anything more you could see that they might be able to do to connect and get a deeper connection?
I would assume that the parent doesn't feel the reconnection is where he wants it to be.
Well,
Is that,
I'm going to assert that until we're all fully connected after, and have a healthy relationship back again, none of us ever feel that we're fully reconnected, even if we have any connection.
therapy can be a backup as an alternative to legal action.
Okay.
I don't think it's something that people should try to do on their own.
Okay, and then another question, is parental alienation reportable in all states? If so, under what would you report it?
Unfortunately, the CPS caseworkers are not really trained in psychological abuse of any kind. So, and then in any case, what do you think an alienated child is going to tell the CPS worker? It's going to get flipped on the alienated parent, that they're the abusive parent.
What if the alienated parent is an attorney and, as part of the alienation, has been teaching the child that lawyers are bad and all court interaction is bad? In other words, court action would likely solidify the alienation. The alienated parent is basically telling the child about court and
Yeah.
clinicians and don't trust any of it. And if you take that route, the child's going to it's going to anchor the alienation further. What do you suggest you might be able to do to mitigate that?
You mean the alienating parent is telling the alienated parent, don't go to court or
No, the
whatever?
alienating parent, the
Yeah.
aligned parent, is telling the child.
Well, they all tell the child that every single case. If that they all bring the children into the parental conflict and the legal um, the legal proceedings. That is a form of child abuse in and of itself.
Yeah, that's the adultification, which you're absolutely right.
Yeah, that's the
And one of the
adultification.
common things that we're all seeing, and I'll just give the terms to it, is the adultification, parentification, spousification, enmeshment. Those are the
Yep.
four things that we're seeing all the time. Can the false memories that these alienated children have programmed in their minds be reversed or repaired eventually, especially after years of programming? And this parent is actually going to court in the next few days. Her daughter has been alienated from her for 7 years,
Mm.
and it actually is refusing contact with the mother.
I absolutely listen, that happens all the time. It's happened in the Turning Points intervention. It's happened in Family Bridges that were around even longer. Yes, the narrative can be turned around under the right circumstances. Again, if there's contact with an unreformed alienating parent, the child will definitely relapse and it won't work. Um, but we've had many successful reunifications that have lasted. In a number of cases, the kids have figured it out, and a number of them have even after they aged out, they still have refused contact with their alienating parent because they realize that parent has abused them.
Okay. Now, in this particular case, they're in California, so Peakley's law is in place, so they can't get a 90-day protective order. What other? And I work with this parent, and I had suggested family systems and get the other father involved in the clinical process to see if you could get a good family systems therapist that might be able to identify the father's the problem. Any other suggestions you have on that?
Well, again, this is child abuse. The court has to understand how severe it is in affecting the child for life. And if you did substitute sex abuse for alienation, who would dream of leaving a child with a parent who was committing sex abuse? And again, like I referred to I sent you that study. There's by Spinazzola. That's also on my website, where they found that psychological abuse is at least as damaging as physical abuse, sexual abuse, or the combination. So the court needs to understand that leaving the child with an abusive parent is going to have severe consequences to the child.
And Linda, that being stated, and I know those who are in court, can you refer anybody to a white paper or any kind of journal expert document that states the long-term impact of parental alienation to a child?
We have lots of there's lots of research that Jennifer Harmon did and Bill Burnett did. They're all on my website under resources. People can upload those articles for free. There's extensive research about the long-term harm to children, specifically from parental alienation, not just psychological abuse, but specifically from parental alienation.
Okay. So I hope everybody got your website. Everybody should go there. And there's, and many of our other professionals have websites with amazing information. Brian Ledber is one of them. He has great legal stuff posted on there.
Yeah,
So
I know. Again, Loretta Mace,
yeah.
LORETTE, .MAASE at gmail.com or .com. Again, you'll find a lot of additional information. She's written a number of articles about parental alienation. They complement mine, they overlap, but some of them are talk about different aspects of it.
Loretta Massey is in Texas, for those of you who are in Texas, and we have a few parents that are from Texas, so it makes it much simpler for you to try to get her into your court case.
Okay.
And then the next question is, what definition of parental alienation do you use? And that's what's going on at the time you were presenting multiple different.
Okay. So I'm going to give absolutely the uniform concept. The concepts are the same, even though everybody may use slightly different terminology, but the dynamic is absolutely the same. It is when one parent manipulates, and I like to say now, coercive controls the child to reject, humiliate, defy the other parent, absent a bona fide protective reason, which means behaviors on the part of that parent that have clinical significance for abuse and neglect. And by the way, you always should say, as determined by the scientific method to make clinical findings.
So while having 50% physical and legal custody, my ex-wife went behind my back and sent our daughter to a therapist to be treated for trauma after acquiring a bogus restraining order, which took 9 months to clear up after proving to the judge just how dishonest she is. There's not a question there, but what is your suggestion on how somebody might deal with that circumstance?
Like I say, that's happening in 80 to 90% of my cases now, where there are these false allegations. And I think that the parent, when this happens and they're exonerated, their lawyer should file a motion saying, okay, Your Honor, now let's consider the harm to my child from believing this false allegation, because the child is equally harmed from the false allegation as if it occurred. What are you going to do about that, Your Honor?
Can one of those therapists who believes the child's lie and continues down the therapy and then in the end accuses the targeted parent again, which you already gave in your presentation, is there any recourse that parents can take? And I do know we can file complaints, but what other suggestions do you have?
You need to find the right therapist. If you are getting a sense, again, developing that treatment contract and the records that you requested, you should be building a case to show this therapist doesn't know what they're doing. Ask for the CV for every therapist before the therapist is appointed. Let's do preventive work. Make sure you get that CV and I would interview the therapist. What's your experience with alienation? Do you even believe alienation exists?
So One of the things we're confronted with, because I do a lot of coaching and I'm working with a lot of parents on that circumstance, and this is a strategy we are using here that I'm using with our parents,
Yeah,
is if you just go to court and you tell them the story and you need some kind of intervention and you leave it to the court to make up what the intervention is, they typically will give you reunification therapy, individual therapy, and to get it all
right,
backwards and wrong.
right,
So
right,
you as the parent must be educated to know what you want to ask the court for. And when you do that, I suggest that when you ask the court for one of these intensive programs or family therapy, that you name your therapist and have your attorneys do your due diligence to name those names and say, in an effort to expedite this immediate, intervention, we're asking that either the other parent or the judge pick one of these names and give them 3 or 4 names. And so you pretty much aced it in if you did your homework. And
right,
versus we don't know what to do, and then they give you the wrong treatment, or go back and you guys argue, or a lot of times we see they give the aligned parent, you go find the therapist for the reunification. And it's like, I don't even understand how that makes any sense. And then
right.
you don't get anybody that's going to be qualified because they're not looking for that person. So, yeah.
And I think it's very important to realize that even individual therapy is contraindicated for an alienated child. Number one, you can't solve a relationship with only one party. You need both parties at the table, at the peace table. Individual therapy only allows the child a platform to vent the alienation narrative for the therapist then to validate. That makes no sense. The therapist doesn't know if the child is reporting accurately. So everybody says, oh, and I understand where they're coming from. The child's rejecting you. Let's put the child in therapy and they'll figure it out because I know I'm a good parent. But no, if the therapist doesn't know what they're doing, they're gonna believe the child.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate part, is that they start with the narrative of the child, and now you're defending yourself in a situation where there's no evidence of anything that you did other than the voice of the child, which is just an extension of the projection of the aligned parent. With that, we're at our time. We've already gone over our time, and we could probably go for another hour. But
Yeah.
I'm going to end our questions now. I'm sorry if I could not get to your question, but Linda, your presentation was amazing.
Yeah,
Everybody should
invite me
know.
back again. Let's not, as my grandmother used to say, don't be a stranger.